I'm Camille Wexler, 36, and until this week, I was nothing more than a footnote in the legacy I helped build, the Seraphine. For years, I captained her through storms, paid her fees, kept her seaworthy. And yet, when the family cruise launched, my name was missing. No call, no excuse. Just a group photo on Instagram that said, "Only the real ones on board." They erased me like I was never there. But tomorrow, they'll remember. Before I tell you what happened when I walked onto that ship in full uniform, drop a comment if you've ever been written out of something you built. And subscribe if you know what it means to take back your name, your place, and your truth. I sat at the marble kitchen counter, hands wrapped around a black ceramic mug. No sugar, no milk. Just the bitter simplicity of caffeine and clarity. The sky outside was still ink dark, but the ocean was beginning to show its restless sheen. Miami never slept, but this hour belonged to people like me, the ones who have been written out. The Instagram notification lit up my screen like an insult. Sal Wexler. Wexler Legacy, 2024. Only the real ones on board, the Seraphine family only. I stared at it. A group shot on the dock. The family lined up like royalty at a coronation, dressed in pastels and pearls, smiling with the kind of confidence only inherited wealth and selective amnesia can provide. And there, gleaming behind them in all her immaculate white, the Seraphine. My Seraphine. They posed in front of her as if she were just another yacht. Not the one I'd captained through a Category 3 storm when everyone else had been ready to abandon ship. Not the one I'd navigated for years, negotiated contracts for, paid dock fees on when the family budget ran out. I was the one who kept her name legal, seaworthy, licensed, but not in the captions, not in the guest list, and certainly not in the photos. I should have expected it. A week ago, Graham had called about updates to the operating committee. He'd sounded casual. Too casual. I now knew why. I set the mug down and tapped open my email. Subject: Internal note, Wexler departure logistics. From Graham Wexler to Carlton Wexler, Savannah Wexler, legal at Wexler Group. No need to mention Camille. We've simplified the manifest. It's just easier this way. She hasn't been involved in years. I stared at the sentence. Simplified the manifest. As if erasing me was akin to deleting a spreadsheet column. As if legacy could be measured in cell widths. I swiped the email away, my thumb steady. Then, I rose from the stool and walked across the clean, open floor of my apartment. Minimalism wasn't a trend to me. It was armor. No distractions, no fluff. Just function. In the corner stood a tall, steel safe embedded in the wall. I knelt and turned the dial. 27, 13, 19. It clicked open. Inside, my U.S. Coast Guard captain's certification. The original operating contract for the Seraphine, with my name as co-owner and maritime manager. Bank statements showing every cent I'd wired to cover fuel, maintenance, staff legal signatures. My initials in blue ink. Scans with timestamps. I reached deeper, fingers brushing against cold metal until they found what I needed. My Navy uniform, dark blue, trimmed in silver, tailored to my frame with military precision. I hadn't worn it in over a year, but I'd never stopped being who I was. They had simply stopped seeing it. I carried the uniform to my bedroom and laid it across the bed like ritual. Each fold smoothed with care, each stripe aligned. No emotion in my face, just the quiet movements of someone reclaiming something that was never truly lost, only ignored. On the desk beside the bed sat my leather-bound notebook. I opened to a fresh page and wrote, "They erased me. They forgot who signs the departure." Then I underlined it, twice. I didn't need to storm the docks or send warning emails. That wasn't my style. They thought silence meant consent, but my silence had always been tactical. And now, tomorrow, when they least expect it, I'll arrive. No RSVP, no pleading for inclusion, no explanations. Just presence, just authority, just the captain. Tomorrow, I won't knock. I'll simply walk aboard. No warning. No press. Just one woman in a pressed uniform walking up the gangway. The white of my gloves caught the morning sun like a blade. Around me, everything gleamed. Chrome railings, crystal champagne towers, silk canopies fluttering in the ocean breeze. The Wexler Legacy cruise launch was, in Savannah's words, a celebration of prestige, vision, and generational power. They had no idea the most dangerous presence on that pier wasn't invited. I moved in silence past velvet ropes, past glossy nameplates and tight-lipped security guards. At the checkpoint, a young man with a clipboard looked up, startled. I didn't speak. I reached into my jacket and withdrew the laminated credential card. Captain Camille Wexler, USCG, Maritime Officer, Seraphine Operations. His eyes widened. He scanned it once, hesitated, then reached for the radio. Behind him, a voice boomed through a speaker. Captain Wexler on board. It was Carlton. The old man's voice hadn't changed. Deep, clipped, all salt and gravel. For a moment, time folded. I remembered standing beside him in a storm, wet hair clinging to my face, his voice calling out navigational bearings like gospel. But that was years ago. Before he'd retired. Before he'd taken my family's side in silence. Now he stood at the gangway's edge in full regalia, and when his eyes met mine, there was no hesitation. He stood taller, squared his shoulders, and saluted. "Permission to come aboard, Captain," he said, voice solemn. I nodded once. Granted. The pier froze. Every glass, every phone, every rehearsed smile stopped mid-movement. The livestream camera panned instinctively toward the commotion. A ripple of confusion spread across the crowd as my name, Captain Camille Wexler, echoed through speakers meant to celebrate Savannah and Graham. And then I walked. Not fast. Not slow. Just deliberate. Each step across the red carpet was a reclamation. Every stiletto heel that clicked against the polished wood was a reminder. You don't erase someone who built the very stage you stand on. Ahead, Savannah stood on a small platform, a champagne flute in one hand and a wireless mic in the other. And so we dedicate this journey to our family's future. Her words caught like smoke in her throat. She saw me. Her grip on the mic faltered. To our... Graham turned too late. He was laughing with two investors, holding a glass of Chablis, mid-toast. When he looked over and saw Carlton saluting me, his face drained like someone watching a shipwreck unfold in slow motion. The camera caught it all. I passed Savannah without speaking. Her PR smile quivered, then died. I watched her eyes flick down to my uniform. Not a rented captain's coat for photo ops, but the real thing. Custom sewn, striped in rank, official and unforgiving. A few guests applauded, confused, thinking this was part of the ceremony. Others whispered. The Wexlers didn't move. They just stood there, mannequins dressed in inheritance. I ascended the ramp of the Seraphine and felt the hull beneath me breathe. Home. Inside, the cool scent of teakwood and ocean filled my lungs. I moved past the hospitality stewards. They didn't stop me. My badge flashed in their peripheral vision and instincts took over. They made way, like old sailors recognizing command even when uncertain of its origin. I didn't speak to anyone. Didn't need to. In the control room, operations deck, as I had always insisted it be called, everything was as I left it. The panel glowed softly. I approached the captain's chair. My hand hovered above the worn leather armrest before lowering with purpose. I sat. And then I opened the Seraphine's maintenance log. My log. Not because I owned the ink or paper, but because I was the one who had written every emergency update, every coastal repair, every upgrade that kept this ship alive. Flipping through the pages, I found the last entry. May 4th, 2024, dockside calibration adjusted. Override code input. Unknown. Unknown. I leaned forward. My fingers hovered above the touchscreen panel. Incoming status alert. Navigational deviation detected. Route deviation. 12 nautical miles. Source. Bridge override. I frowned. There was no scheduled deviation in the itinerary I had filed before being scrubbed from the guest manifest. I tapped for details. Override code entered May 6th, 22:41 p.m., just last night. By whom? I looked at the bridge's surveillance access. Locked. Password updated. Another small erasure. Another petty theft of authority. They were planning something. They had changed something, but they had no idea I was already here, already in position. And this time, I wasn't just defending my place. I was reclaiming the ship. They changed the system, but not the woman who built it. The touchscreen blinked red again. Route deviation. 12 nautical miles. Override. Unknown source. I stood still, eyes fixed on the panel. The Seraphine, this ship, my ship, wasn't responding the way she should. Whoever had input the changes hadn't done it with care. They had brute forced their way through the navigation protocol like toddlers smashing buttons on a toy console. I tapped to request the last diagnostic cycle. It stalled, then hung. Firmware, 4.8.12. I blinked. That version was 3 cycles out of date. Deprecated since March. No system patch. No security check. No wonder she was veering off course. This wasn't sabotage. This was incompetence. I pulled open the lower control panel beneath the console, revealing the manual access node. Dust clung to the metal casing. No one had touched it in months. I unscrewed the latch, exposing the port. My hand reached into the side pouch of my uniform, my old Navy-issued diagnostics drive, the one I wasn't supposed to still have. I plugged it in. The terminal flared to life. Behind me, footsteps stormed down the corridor. I didn't turn. "You have got to be kidding me." Graham's voice thundered from the upper walkway outside the deck. "You walk in like some damn ghost and now the whole route's off course?" I didn't answer. He banged a hand against the glass door. "This is why women shouldn't steer ships." I looked over my shoulder just once. "Then maybe don't ask them to fix what you broke." His mouth opened, but I had already turned back to the panel. From the corner of my eye, I caught movement. Someone stood just inside the threshold, small frame, phone in hand, recording. Sierra Cho, the youngest engineer on the crew. She didn't interrupt. She just watched. Phone held low like she knew something important was happening. I worked fast. Muscle memory took over. Back in the Navy, we'd done an exercise in the dead of night. Blackout conditions, system failure, and a fake fire drill running in the background. I'd recalibrated the nav bearings manually, sweating under a red emergency lamp while sirens blared. This was quieter, but it was the same kind of pressure. I keyed in override clearance, WEXL-R 98-CAPT. Input accepted. Diagnostics cleared. I reloaded the firmware. Then patched the GPS sync to the latest log from the Harbor Master's database. Bearings recalculated, wind alignment rechecked, propulsion output rebalanced. 7 minutes. Exactly 7 minutes from touch to correction. The system chirped. Course corrected. Status, stable. I leaned back, exhaled through my nose, and muttered under my breath, "Now she's safe to sail." Sierra caught it. Every word. She gave me a tiny nod, mouthed, "Respect." Then slipped out before anyone could stop her. I didn't stay to bask in the silence. Down in the crew galley, the air smelled like fried rice and chlorine. The staff, engineers, stewards, maintenance, sat at long metal tables, talking softly between bites. I grabbed a tray and took a seat at the far end. No one stared. No one fawned. But no one asked me to leave either. Upstairs, champagne still flowed. The main table, a white linen monstrosity with monogrammed menus and reserved nameplates, stood full of investors, influencers, Wexlers, and oblivious egos. No one noticed I wasn't there. Except the people who mattered. Across from me, one of the cooks slid a bottle of ginger ale toward me. No label, just glass. I raised it in quiet thanks. He tapped his can against mine like a salute. "Glad you're back, Captain," he said. I smiled, small and real. Glad someone noticed. By evening, the video hit the internal crew chat. Less than an hour later, it leaked to the public. On TikTok, it spread like wildfire. Sierra hadn't posted it. Someone else did. But it was her camera angle. A quiet, 7-minute clip of a woman in a Navy uniform disassembling a control panel, rebooting a system, and walking away like it was nothing. The caption read, "Turns out the Wexler reject is the only reason the Seraphine floats." Hashtags exploded. Captain Wexler. She built it. Silent power. Wexler scandal. News outlets picked it up by midnight. That night, I returned to my cabin. Not the suite Graham had promised himself. Not Savannah's luxury berth. Just the officer's cabin. Functional. Secure. Familiar. On the desk was a yellowed envelope. No one had been in here. The lock hadn't been breached. The vent sealed. But it was there. Centered. The handwriting? Unmistakable. Curved but firm. "For your eyes only. Mom." I didn't move. My throat tightened as if I were back in basic training, holding my breath underwater. I reached out slowly and ran a finger along the paper. It felt like memory. The woman they never talked about. The only one who never treated me like excess weight. And now, from beyond, she'd returned. Ships don't lie, but logs do. When edited by cowards. The engine log room smelled like burnt copper and silence. Not the kind of silence that soothed, the kind that waited, watched. I stood alone at the console bank, light from the data monitors casting a pale green hue across my uniform. The system purred beneath the floor grates, alive but unwilling to speak unless questioned the right way. I keyed into the fuel diagnostics from the past 72 hours. Something didn't make sense. The Seraphine ran with twin stabilizers and dual fuel redundancy. She was overbuilt by design, safer than most vessels in her class. But the log showed consumption spikes in the starboard tank, starting exactly at 2:17 a.m. the previous night. No wind shifts, no maneuver logs, no logical explanation. I flagged it. Cross-checked propulsion telemetry. Still wrong. Behind me, the door squealed open. Sierra stepped inside, her boots echoing louder than usual against the metal floor. Her voice was low. I didn't want to send this over the net. She handed me a printout. Slightly creased, her thumb pressed into the margin like she couldn't let go. "What is it?" I asked. "Calibration records. Someone backdated them. See this timestamp?" She pointed to a line item logged under Ortega's ID. Fuel ratio readings from Monday, time-stamped for 9:22 a.m. Except I'd been on deck at 9:22, and Ortega had been elbow-deep in the coolant panel. Nowhere near this terminal. "It's forged," I said. She nodded. "And that's not the only one." I tapped my access card and called up the encrypted backups from dry dock inspections. I didn't trust the live logs anymore. It took 15 minutes to extract the raw drive data. 10 more to run a comparison. When the list popped up, 27 modified entries, all within the past 2 weeks, my stomach turned. Even the engine signature checks had been falsified. This wasn't sloppy. This was deliberate. Someone had gone through the Seraphine's mechanical soul and rewritten her truth. Michael Ortega didn't deny it. We found him 2 levels up in the compressor bay, checking PSI levels like it was just another Wednesday. "You're good at hiding things," I said, arms folded. He didn't look surprised, just tired. "I didn't touch the engines," he muttered. "Just the logs." "And the signatures?" He paused. "Digital overlay." He said it was just to make the numbers cleaner for the launch. "No harm." "Who's he?" Silence. Then a sigh. "Graham." Back in the log room, I copied every raw file to a blank USB, then encrypted the contents and backed them to a private cloud node tied to my old Navy ID. I'd kept the credentials active for emergencies. This qualified. The implications hit me in waves. Fuel misreadings could trigger system failure at sea. If a turbine stalled mid-crossing, hundreds of people, guests, staff, investors, could be stranded or worse. This wasn't just ego-driven erasure. It was criminal negligence. A captain could lose her license for less. A company could be shut down. But Graham didn't care. He never did. He wanted the shine, not the substance. And the cost would land on someone else. Me, if I hadn't come back. I labeled the drive, locked it inside my cabin's hidden drawer, took another copy and uploaded it to an off-board vault only I could access. Two-factor, triple encryption, tamper alerts active. I trusted no one else with it. By dinner, the formal dining room buzzed with oblivion. People laughed, danced, toasted with vintage rosé. Savannah floated through the crowd in gold chiffon, her face an Instagram filter come to life. She saw me, but didn't acknowledge me. Not yet. At 22:41, I returned to my cabin. A message waited on my tablet, unsigned but no mistake who it was from. Meet me in crew quarters 2C at 2300 hours. Bring no one. SW. I stared at the signature, the initials, the elegance of it. Savannah Wexler, the woman who'd smiled on camera while cutting me out of the family narrative, who'd plastered every surface of the ship with her version of the legacy. Now she wanted to talk, or maybe confess. I locked the tablet, reached for the encrypted drive one more time. Not to bring it, just to remind myself. I wasn't powerless anymore. I held the truth, and this time I wouldn't let them bury it. She handed me the USB like it was a knife. Not to use, but to understand I could. The crew quarters hallway at 2300 was quiet, just the low hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional groan of shifting steel. Savannah stood beneath one of the bulkhead sconces, arms folded. Not in defense, in surrender. "This isn't a peace offering," she said, holding out the silver drive. "It's just overdue." I took it without a word. I didn't know everything, not at first, she added. But I stopped asking questions the moment the money started flowing. That part's on me. I waited. She didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't cry. And maybe that was the most honest thing she'd ever done. Inside my quarters, I ran the drive through a secure dock. Folder by folder, the truth unraveled itself. Wexler Maritime Consulting, LLC, registered in St. Kitts. Graham's name wasn't listed anywhere officially, but the founding IP address traced back to his office. Shell documents tied the company to a dozen invoices for training modules, digital experience packages, and brand alignment audits. All nonsense. One stood out, $92,000 to an influencer engagement firm, which turned out to be a storefront in Tampa with a disconnected line. Another, a $127,400 wire labeled as Bulkhead Integrity Consulting to an offshore account. The ship's bulkheads hadn't been inspected, not officially, not since dry dock. I kept going. The anger didn't boil. It froze. Every click layered deception like paint over rot. The final folder held security footage. Graham in the engine control room, May 3rd, 03:14 a.m., entering override credentials and editing calibration logs. Alone. By 7:30 Thursday morning, I was sitting across from Chief Officer Carlton and the ship's legal counsel, Ms. Yumi Tanaka. She wore wire-rimmed glasses and a face that didn't flinch. Carlton looked 10 years older than yesterday. I placed the binder and USB on the table. "Let the record show," I said, voice even. Wexler didn't lose its compass. It handed it to the wrong hands. Ms. Tanaka flipped through the printouts. "This is substantial. Fraud, falsification of safety documents, wire transfers through unregistered entities. We'll need to notify maritime compliance." Carlton spoke next. "Do you believe the ship is still at risk?" "Number, I've isolated all systems, but he used the ship's name as collateral. The fallout will extend beyond the hull." They nodded. "We'll call an internal emergency session," Ms. Tanaka said. He needs to be present, at least in formality. At 9:05, I walked into the executive briefing room in full uniform. Savannah was already seated in the back corner, eyes down. For once, she wasn't performing. Graham sat at the far end of the table, half-lowered sunglasses on his face like this was some kind of fashion intervention. His smirk faltered when I entered. He didn't expect me in dress whites. Didn't expect me to be holding the narrative. I placed the binder and the USB on the glass table, slid them forward. This is an official report of misappropriation, technical sabotage, and ethical breach, I said. Authored by me, verified by the ship's chief engineer and legal advisor, witnessed by Officer Sierra Cho. Ms. Tanaka pressed play on the video footage. Graham paled. "This is a joke," he said, rising. "You're just bitter. You were always bitter." "No," I said. "I was always quiet. That's different." He tried to keep talking, but the room had already shifted. Carlton stood. Savannah did too, not in protest, but in silent confirmation. "Captain," Carlton asked, his voice low but firm. "Per protocol, do you want him off the ship?" I didn't look at Graham. I looked at the binder, at the data, at the hundreds of invisible crew who'd trusted this ship to keep floating, at Sierra, at Ortega, at Savannah, who had finally decided to witness the damage instead of monetizing it. "Yes," I said, "and off the legacy." By noon, Graham Wexler was escorted to Deck 4. A tender boat waited below, tethered like a punishment. No press, no ceremony, just silence, as two uniformed officers helped him down the ladder and into the bobbing launch. He looked up once, not at me, at the ship. The Seraphine didn't blink. Legacy doesn't either. It just waits for someone brave enough to carry it. They built this ship with expectations. I kept her afloat with silence. The morning sky over Key West stretched cloudless and pale gold. The sea rolled gently beneath the Seraphine's anchored hull, calm like the breath before a final word. Below deck, the crew moved with a different kind of rhythm. No longer watching me from the corners of their eyes, no longer wondering if I belonged here. I passed through the hallway and felt nods replace suspicion. Respect isn't loud. It makes space quietly. In the operations lounge, I clicked into the communications terminal and uploaded the final draft of the new training initiative. It would open applications to girls with no maritime lineage, just aptitude and drive. No last names required. "Access changes implemented, Captain," Sierra said from beside me. She had been here since 6 a.m. "First draft's live on the internal portal. Want me to review the public site?" "Yes," I said, "and remove the family crest from the header." She grinned. "Done." The briefing room was empty when I passed it. The chair Graham used to occupy sat pushed back, untouched, the imprint of presence without permanence. I walked the corridor toward my quarters, but paused when I saw her. Evelyn Wexler stood by the port window. Her reflection was clearer than her face, the kind of woman who had spent years painting strength over uncertainty. "Camille," she said, voice firm but not sharp. I waited. She didn't embrace me, didn't apologize. Just opened the folder in her hand and pulled out a page, yellowed, edges soft. A blueprint I hadn't seen in years. It was my first schematic for a 2-tiered rudder system, hand-drawn at 16, inked over pencil, smudged in the corners. I had left it on the dining room table once. No one ever acknowledged it. "You gave her direction," Evelyn said, "when we gave you doubt." It wasn't an apology, but maybe it was the only kind of truth she knew how to offer. "I kept this," she added. "I didn't know why, until this week." I took it, folded it once, slid it into my pocket. At sunset, the entire staff gathered on the upper deck for the final announcement. No press, no champagne towers, just wind and water and a wooden podium bolted into the deck for speeches like this. I didn't thank the family. I didn't list credentials. I talked about ballast and storms and what it meant to steer something not built with you in mind. I said leadership wasn't about who built the ship, but who made sure it never sank. Savannah stood near the rail, quiet. She held the printed manifesto in her hands, 3 staples and a title. The new course, Leadership Without Inheritance. Some of the investors didn't clap. That was fine. They weren't meant to. Carlton stepped forward after I spoke, nodded once, then leaned over and whispered, "One of the new cadets sent in an application already. She's from Omaha, first in her family to graduate high school." I smiled. "Let's make room." When it was over, the crew lingered, the kind of silence that follows an ending not with sadness, but relief. One of the younger navigators, Rachel, I think, approached. She hesitated, then asked, "Captain, will you keep the Wexler name?" I looked out at the sea. "No," I said. "The ocean knows me by action, not legacy." In my cabin, I unpinned the brass name tag from my uniform. Camille Wexler, Captain. I turned it in my fingers, felt the weight of each letter. Not heavy, just final. I opened the small porthole. The wind rushed in with brine and freedom. With a single breath, I let the tag fall. It hit the water without a splash, swallowed into the wake. And I said, not aloud, but to the woman I'd become. I didn't reclaim my place. I outgrew it. I used to think silence meant defeat. That when they stopped saying my name, when they left me out of the meetings, the documents, the family portraits, it meant I no longer existed. That being forgotten was worse than being hated. But now I understand. Silence, when chosen, is not weakness. It's strategy. It's fuel. It's the space between what they assume and what you're building behind the scenes. They thought I disappeared. What I did was return to the helm. When Savannah handed me that USB, she didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't need to. She wasn't trying to be a sister again. She was handing me a choice. The power to expose, to punish, to make noise. But I didn't need noise. I had proof. And in the meeting room, the same one I wasn't allowed in 2 years ago, I didn't shout. I didn't slam doors. I didn't cry. I stood in full uniform, laid the binder and the USB down, and said what needed to be said. Let the record show. Wexler didn't lose its compass. It handed it to the wrong hands. No one interrupted me, not even the legal advisor, because truth has its own weight, and that room was full of it. When Carlton asked if I wanted Graham off the ship, I answered without hesitation. Not for revenge, but because leadership means choosing what keeps the vessel safe. And sometimes that means removing the storm disguised as legacy. The crew didn't clap. They just stood. That was enough. That night, alone in my cabin, I found my old name tag. I traced the letters like a woman reading the tombstone of an identity she had already buried. Then I dropped it into the sea. The next morning, I wore no badge. But I walked that deck as a captain. And this time, no one questioned why. My mother came to me, hands shaking with an old folder. Inside were my childhood sketches of rudder designs, long dismissed as doodles. She said, "You gave her direction when we gave you doubt." It wasn't closure, but it was clarity. And clarity is enough. Camille Wexler was never meant to inherit the spotlight. She took back the ship they tried to dock without her. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. And in doing so, she redefined what it means to lead. Not through bloodline, but through merit, silence, and the strength to return even after being erased. The ones who once wielded control through arrogance and illusion now stood exposed. Not by spectacle, but by the quiet power of facts and integrity. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive in a courtroom or with applause. It arrives in the moment a woman walks back into a room and is no longer invisible. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, justice may arrive late, but it resonates powerfully once it's heard. Because when injustice is met with quiet resolve, even silence becomes a verdict. Camille didn't reclaim her place. She outgrew it, and charted a new course for those who would come after her. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. And perhaps Standing up today means you'll never again have to bow to injustice tomorrow. If you've made it this far, thank you. Not just for watching, but for witnessing. For holding space for a story that doesn't end with revenge, but with reclamation. Camille Wexler didn't storm the ship. She didn't beg for inclusion. She returned with facts, evidence, and quiet authority. And that was enough, more than enough. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to shout over the noise. It's to walk into the room they tried to keep you out of and speak truth that can't be ignored. To everyone who's ever been written out of the meeting, the group photo, the guest list. To everyone who stayed silent not because they were weak, but because they were planning their return. This story is yours too. You don't need a title to lead. You don't need permission to be worthy. You just need clarity. And the strength to act when the moment comes. So, if Camille's story resonated with you, if you've ever been cut out, overlooked, or underestimated, leave a comment and share your story. Because silence may be tactical, but solidarity is powerful. And if you believe more people need to hear stories like this, about women who reclaim what's theirs not through noise but through truth, please like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who's still standing at the edge of the gangway, wondering if they're allowed to step forward. The answer is yes. Thank you for being here. Your presence, just like Camille's, doesn't need validation. It already matters.